I'm Nick Hernandez, and you're listening to the Positivity Matters podcast, where we interview leaders from a variety of fields and well being scholars of various sorts. I feel like today my guest is a little bit of both. Dr. Rob Leone, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So, in the classroom, this happens at Idaho State University, and out there in the business world, it probably takes you all over the place. Tell us a little bit about the thing you do and if I've characterized that correctly.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. I teach in graduate and undergraduate programs at my university. We focus on, generally speaking, human resource development. And so it's a slight nuance from human resource management. We don't do benefits, we don't do compensation, we don't do labor law. We focus on the employee, the people aspects of the organization. And that ranges from, or it can range from anywhere from your training to your employee development to hiring strategies around fit to coaching, succession planning, all these things that are essential as we think about high performing organizations, right? And, it doesn't matter how good our process is, or it doesn't matter how good our mission is. It's the people that actually make sure those things work. And it's also the people that are the reasons why they fall apart sometimes, right? Because we are messy and we're messy in a good way. And but it's complicated. When you have a team of three, it's messy in one way. If you have a team of 40, it's messy in a different way. And so what I do is I work in the classroom to help my students understand these variables, models, tools, what the research is telling us, but also what happens in the world of practice from my own practice experiences. And then outside of the classroom, and it's pretty awesome because I could draw upon similar concepts from the classroom, but soften them in a way so that they're very much industry appropriate and practice appropriate. So you'll never hear me in a workshop talking about theory for more than 20 seconds, other than this is what the theory says, beep, now moving on. Because it's all about what does this really look like when it's being applied in people's lives? And that's what the goal is there. Teach with an incredible amount of gray in the classroom, helping my students understand that it's just not do what I say. It's tough, it's uncertain at times, but let me give you models and frameworks and good information, and then you can bring in your context, whether you're working for government, for profit, nonprofit, higher education, healthcare. We service all of them because what's central here is the frameworks and tools of working with different people.
One of the things you said piqued my curiosity. I'm wondering if there
Yeah.
might be some way that I could get something installed in my brain that automatically shuts me down after I start talking theory for more than 20 seconds. I could really use that.
I know that's tough, right? And you see, it's kind of like, you just kind of like watching students' eyes glaze over at times. Then you're in organizations, and if you spend too much time on it, and some people are super geeked out by it, right? So we have a lot of fun, but it's like, look, we're going into lunch. I'm going to stick around. Why don't you come over and chat with me here? Because I'm sure not everyone else wants to hear about this right now, right? But it's fun and it's interesting and it's neat, and it's a place to start.
Yeah. I, I'm curious, where did your doctoral studies start? What was your focus back when?
Yeah,
And
so my focus was organizational performance. And really specifically, when I finished the program, I was really focused at building solutions for organizations to improve the problems we were seeing with whether it was people performance, process performance, stuff like that. But what I quickly, not quickly, it took some time to figure this out. What I learned eventually was that as we were trying to apply these interventions, solutions for these organizations, they weren't very sticky in the sense of they didn't really stay within the organization and they weren't rolled out well. Because sometimes a client will say, "Hey, I want you to build this for us and we'll figure it out from here." And that is what I'm referring to is not very sticky because what we did was we built a system around their needs. But what I eventually learned is without understanding human behavior better and the psychology of work, I needed to um, I was leaving things on the table for that organization. So the solution and the intervention, we still design those. But what happens with that, we now have it backed up as it relates to human behavior, motivation, emotions, why people do what they do, things that relate to that. So now when we talk about an intervention and solution, I still have leaders that don't really know the science behind much of this, which is fine. But now I can give them some scaffolding so that they can grow into the science essentially or grow into the practice so that when they go to run with that solution, it's much more it's much more successful. And so that has resulted, like I said, a lot more time spending on the psychology of work, human behavior, decision making, those things that are the variables that make us messy, right? The things that make us human.
Yeah. So I'm thinking if the goal is maximal human flourishing,
Mhm.
and we're starting with messy, what would a theory look like that gets from messy to maximal human flourishing, and how many confounding variables would we have to account for?
Right. That's one of the big challenges, right? And that's one of the breakdowns between, say, science and practice, right? So, a couple things. One, in industry, we don't have a common definition for a term. And so that's problem number one. Number two, we don't refine the term enough to really accurately evaluate or measure it like we do in the sciences. So that's another problem. And so we have a lot of variables that factor into a person's well-being, let's say, or performance or decision making. And in industry, in many instances, we might be taught to break something down and really analyze it according to, say, our craft or our discipline. But that is not necessarily a mindset that leaders are onboarded with, right? It tends to be that you have your craft and discipline and you've been a good salesperson or people like you, let's move you into a leadership role. Well, with no preparation, no support, and then they try to troubleshoot. And how does a person try to troubleshoot? They troubleshoot based off of their own inputs, their experiences, and if you don't this is the real value to the academic and education framework is that we really handle terms and variables really strict to be sure that we're talking so we're clear on what we're talking about so we're on the same page of what we're talking about and that's one of the areas where we run into challenges in organizations. It's not because people don't want to do a good job, there's just so much that they don't know. And how do you ask questions when you don't know what you don't know?
Right. And what's the statistical significance of a sample size of one?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Right. Everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people think they're running their own labs and but they really fail to recognize their bias and how that factors in to what it is they're seeing. So we
Yeah.
come in and create some space so that because at the end of the day, let's use that word you were talking about earlier, flourishing. At the end of the day, we want our people in the organization to thrive, to flourish. And one measure of that for me at the end of the workday is that that employee goes home with enough fuel in their tank that they can be present for what it is they want to do after work, whether that is be with loved ones, volunteer, hit the gym, whatever. And we know that when organizations or that organization experience is sucking it out of us, we just in some instances go home and just kind of wait till the next day starts again, right? We're not at our best there. And so by understanding how people behave and how people are wrestling with challenges in their life and creating this level of awareness with leaders, they can help their people figure things out that they're not aware of themselves, right? Why are they not thriving? Why are they not motivated? How can they backwards track that towards motivation factors at a foundational level, things like that. And so what we want to do is prepare people with the tools, not necessarily the education expertise, because that takes too long, but tools that we've built based off of the education expertise so that they can run with those things.
Fascinating. As you've encountered, I'm assuming government, nonprofit, business engagements,
Mm-hmm.
professionally. Have you seen some where people seem like they're thriving, or maybe they've made that journey from not doing so well with their organizational culture, languishing maybe, to thriving?
Yeah,
Or
but it doesn't happen haphazardly, that's for sure. If it does, it's because you just have a magic mix of people and the synergies there, right? And so here's a true story. When I talk to people about the scenario, the situation, and they're like, "Oh, we're good. Everything's just working out really well." Well, what are you doing for development? What are you doing for ongoing planning, create capacity and agility? Well, they're like, "Oh, no, we don't need to worry about that. We're good." So basically what they're telling me is that they're not kind of future-proofing themselves and they're not open to that. At least they're not open to it with me. And one of the things I share with them is that I remind them that and you're one bad decision away from a problem in many instances, because there's absolute truth that a group can have some synergy, some just it's just vibing. It's like a sports team. You could feel it when this one line's on the ice or something like that. They just have this right energy. But you know the analogy in sports. You take that left wing out and you put a different person in that hasn't played with that team, and it doesn't have the same feel. The same thing's true for the organization. So how are we future proofing our organizations and our people's well-being concurrently? And and unfortunately, many people leave it to default, right? So culture is going to occur by design or default. And those ones that are really doing well, it's usually purposeful. It's by design. It takes time. It takes resources. It takes insights. And but it's a great place to be when you have that. You have people choosing to stay because they feel valued and appreciated. They feel healthy. They feel like there's an alignment between their own organizational cultural beliefs as an organization and team and their own, and their identities caught up in that. And that's a good place to be. Whereas the other way, it's not necessarily true. People choose to leave. They're not satisfied. They don't have psychological safety. They aren't in an environment where it's trusting. They could have open conversations, and our identity, our not our identity, but our humanity struggles and suffers in that.
yeah, yeah, the psychological safety, that is foundational. Um,
Yeah.
and it doesn't seem like that always happens. But that is just a foundation. It's not the summit of the mountain, it seems, but even just getting there would be awesome if everybody were able to be in a place where that was the case.
Yeah, it's a piece of it, right? It's a piece of the puzzle.
Okay. Now, one piece that goes into the mix of a great workplace, I think, has something to do with character strengths. And I appreciate you being willing to try the VIA survey of character strengths and share that yours came out as love, appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, kindness, and creativity. How did those strike you, and what are some of your favorites, and how do you see them playing out through what you do?
I would have probably guessed four of those, four of the five top five, but I wasn't that 15 years ago, let me tell you that, right? And I just had a different phase of life, different realizations, and prioritizing things differently. And this totally makes sense that I lead with love, believe in compassion. I use the term sometimes in workshops, and I know that turns some people off, but it also brings other people in, right? I really believe that we have standard innate human needs, which is documented. It's the science shows that. And so knowing that, I want to cultivate that experience for people. The appreciation of beauty aspect of that is just me and my eyes and how I see the world. There's beauty in everything. And recognizing that kind of warms my heart and it helps me, it lightens the mood for me, I guess I'll put it that way. It helps me stay out of my head and just be aware and present. The other stuff, gratitude, kindness, creativity. I don't think I would have guessed creativity would have been up that high. Um, but I'm a builder. I love building. During COVID, we had to shut down a couple businesses. We bought one of those Sprinter vans that was empty. So we gutted it down to the studs and I rebuilt it into a luxury camper van machine as huge as beautiful. Um, and it was so rewarding for me to put my hands on that. And that's what I like to do is touch things and build things. And I guess you could arguably say that about life too, that I do that same type of approach with people. So uh, not surprised, but definitely different. But it doesn't mean, we were talking about strengths earlier, and my top strength was strategic. It doesn't mean I'm still not that. That's a different measure, different system. Uh, at this point in my life, I'm more self-aware that I could turn these things on and off as I need to make sure I accomplish the task.
Yeah. The one of the I don't think it's the entire uh architecture of human flourishing, but I guess the theory behind these strengths are that everyone has them all and that we're wired in such a way that expressing our top ones, if their methodology is correct, is a way to sort of optimize our experience of joy and meaning. And so basically, it's almost like it feels like it's sort of a customized recipe for living a good life for you. That's kind of my read on it. And another thought that I've had about it is that we can develop all of these traits, I'm sure, with
Mhm,
effort.
mhm.
And my guess is that if we're hanging around other people where it's the one that we want to cultivate is someone else's, amongst their top strengths,
Yeah,
I'm guessing that if we're hanging out with them, that it might make that process a little more efficient. If
yeah,
that
makes total
has
sense.
now, I don't know how that would be tested, but that is like I guess kind of a dream that I have would be to model that in some way. So almost like in that we all have different configurations of strengths. It would be something like from economics. I think it's called like the law of comparative advantage, that when nations start trading, that it behooves them to focus on what they're relatively best at, and the world
Mhm.
is a better off place. It
Yep.
feels like there might be something like that with strengths that could potentially take place. Um, and then that other element that I just mentioned, that like I guess the big picture is like focus on your strengths and manage weaknesses as necessary, or build up your lesser strengths as necessary. And that sort of like that peer interaction part is something that I don't hear discussed, but just philosophical reflection, just like draws me to that, like as something that's possible.
Absolutely. I believe in it wholeheartedly, right? So if you're familiar with the concept of emotion contagion, it's almost the same type of concept that you're talking about, that someone could have a really negative experience in a room or before they come to work and they're walking in the front door and they're funky, they're off. And then the demeanor of the room goes from positive and peace to edgy and uncertain. That happens every once in a while with my wife and I. I'll have something happens and I'm grumpy when I get home, and she was happy. And how's your day? And I was kind of short and snippy. And then all of a sudden, she's miserable, and I'm over it. And so I believe that wholeheartedly, right? I think about it also like you ever hang out with some friends, and let's just use football as an example. And I was hanging out with some friends. I made some new friends in a new community. I'm not a football fan. I have no interest in football, no evidence of football in my past. Well, look, they're getting together to watch Monday night at the bar or a house. Well, I'm going to go because I'm going for the camaraderie and just the friendship, right? And then eventually, by the end of the year, I'm wearing a jersey or something at playoff time, right? Like it's we're malleable. We can be influenced, right? Surround yourself with by people that are grateful or kind. If you're coming from a world of dark and negativity, you'll either be annoyed and you'll leave, or you'll warm up and join them in that journey. And that's, that's where leadership has this opportunity to influence people, right? The leader of the team has to be able to see beyond the members of their team to see what's ahead and what might affect and threaten their team. How can I use some of the things that I know are either best practices, strengths, these admirable, high regarded pieces to start instilling in my team? I noticed that someone has some pretty toxic negativity. Maybe I'll work with them through one-on-ones, start unpacking that a bit and sharing in some of my joyful moments and help them look for that, right? And I think we could definitely have a great influence over others to do that.
Thank you for reflecting on that for a bit. Okay, so we brought up leadership several times. The first, I think at the time it was a conceptual model, servant leadership by
Mhm.
Robert Greenleaf. It has various constitutive elements, and then he's got like a pretty high standard for if one is being effective at practicing leadership in this way. I'll read it out here for our
Sure.
listeners. That is the best test of servant leadership is this. Do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to serve? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? How's that for a test of leadership?
I think it's pretty awesome. I do think it overlooks an important element that um, sometimes people aren't ready to be there to harness that. Uh, I think about some of our clients that are providing service, whether it's responses to food insecurity, housing insecurity, these other things. And while I want them to interface with the people of need to be taken care of, it's hard to move someone that's food insecure, housing insecure into a service mindset when they can't even necessarily take care of their own foundational things. So it's one of these things that we have to be careful and sensitive to realize that people have basic needs that must be fulfilled in order to hit these higher order purpose functions. And that's kind of what Greenleaf's speaking to there. And it's an awesome statement, and it's very relevant, very, very true. And that's where we should aspire to be. But it's hard to pay attention at work. It's kind of like what we hear about kids, right? It's hard to pay attention in class when they're hungry and they haven't eaten for 24 hours.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. I have a conceptual framework for mental health overall. There's a Corey Keyes, he suggests envisioning complete mental health as an XY coordinate system where the Y axis, we could call it mental illness, the X axis, we can call it positive mental well being. Then set aside the Y axis or mental illness, and then we're just considering positive mental well being for the moment. And the low end of the positive mental well being vector, he calls languishing, and the upper end flourishing. And I'm envisioning some points in between, like okay and good. And it kind of feels like servant leadership as an ideal might correspond with that once someone's positive mental well-being is good, that's probably indicative of a lot of material needs being met. And maybe at that point, they might be ready for trying to practice that, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
That the way that I kind of envision moving along that spectrum, for me, the focal point is the capitalizing on the dynamic that when we uh, do good, we tend to feel good. So acts of kindness usually come right back to
Yep.
us in terms of our own happiness. And my thought is that when we're languishing, maybe the thing would be just an act of kindness intentionally every now and then, um, while trying to keep your head above water. And then, like, once we're okay, maybe then, like, think about committed volunteerism. And then once we're good, think about maybe like the community building type volunteer opportunities. But my focus with all that is like our jobs may have us so kind of tied down, and like I appreciate the work that you're doing because I have heard that maybe 30% of people like kind of like their workplace or something like that. And so I see what you're doing is sort of adjusting that ratio for the better. Um,
Attempting to.
yeah, and so the focus on the thing that I'm trying to build for like at the like a community level thing to help people move from languishing to at least okay centers on the idea of using our discretionary time um, in benevolent ways. And I think there's kind
Mhm.
of a tracking of positive mental well-being's level with the complexity of benevolent endeavors that we engage with.
Yeah.
Um, and I really appreciate the workplace environments that make that possible. So one of my um, em- employers here in Lincoln, Nebraska has a policy of 8 hours of volunteer leave a month, paid
Hmm.
leave. And that
Hmm.
makes half hour to a school to mentor a young person, and then an hour there and an hour, half hour back. It comes out to being able to maintain that weekly commitment. And that was an extremely meaningful experience. So I am very grateful to that employer for that particular thing.
Yeah, that's a great idea, especially if you can make that work. Wow.
What kinds of things do you see that seem to be effective at maybe helping employees find a greater sense of meaning and joy? Like what could a leader do if they're like in charge of?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. They're a leader, so.
Right. Well, there's yes and no, right? So I believe in driving an engagement framework and helping your people be a part of the solution for where they want to be, what they want to do, right? I try to flatten power differential between the leader and the team so that there's a higher regard for shared leadership and decision making. Sometimes the leader just has to make the decision, but what we're trying to do is pull people in to be a part of the solution as well as casting the direction they want this team or this organization to go. And by doing that, we cultivate higher levels of influence over others. We cultivate higher levels investment among those team members. There's a greater level of ownership. And then um, they as they do this, they start to cultivate a greater alignment with the identity of the organization, right? Juxtapose that against an organization that gives away a lot of free swag for their teams, but the satisfaction surveys are really low, let's say. Uh, they don't have identity with that organization. Those free shirts are worn instead to paint in as opposed to going out for drinks afterward, things like that. So having the people be a part of the path forward is a great way to cultivate that engagement. But part of what the leader has to be mindful of is what the experience is of all people in the team in the sense of my experience in this organization is not representative of everyone on my team. Everyone's approaching this either job or organization or the combination of both differently as it relates to taking care of basic needs such as providing money for food and shelter, for higher level satisfaction items like entertainment, community, socialization, moving on up to purpose and identity as it relates to actualization. So it's important, in my opinion, that leaders are aware of things such as self-awareness. So emotional intelligence is a big factor. It's important to recognize the role emotions play in behavior and how that influences behavior. Also, how that sometimes knocks us off our game because we might be well intentioned and then something happens, you get a call and then you're ticked off for the rest of the day, or you can't finish your project on time, or the quality goes down. So it's this healthy view of how people are people. I don't like it when I'm working with people that think they love the organization more than others. And it's hard for, I think that approach cuts the legs out from other people. They just see it differently. And they're likely, in many instances, just as committed, but it's a complicating dynamic. So I say you invest in self-awareness, emotional intelligence, understanding emotions, so that people feel supported, they feel heard. One way you can do that, we do this at kicks off the workshops and staff meetings and things like that, is we have emotion check-ins with staff so that we see how they're feeling at the beginning of, say, 8-hour workshop, and then they bring it back to their teams to see how their teams faring at the beginning of staff meeting. If everyone comes back in kind of the red area, a little anxious, angry, unease, it's a good sign that maybe we should take a pause and have a conversation about how our well-being right now before jumping into the agenda, or maybe having a conversation about, boy, me as a leader, I'm going to be vulnerable right now. It's been a wicked 2 months for me personally as it relates to the grind we've been in. How are you guys doing? You good? What's going on? Because you're not going to get to work if everyone's hijacked right there, right? And it's amazing what that power is in that situation where people get an opportunity, set aside work for 10 minutes, talk about some of their challenges and obstacles. They feel heard. They've let it off their chest. And then as a group, as a team, that camaraderie is there. And it's like, are we ready to push another week and we'll get this project done and it's behind us? Yeah, let's go do it. The fun thing is we rolled this this mood graph, the moodometer. It's from Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence, and it's a great little tool that helps you identify emotions. And one of our clients took it, laminated it, and put it in their break room. And every person on the team now has a magnet with their face on it. And so when they come in the morning, they put their face on the moodometer to let the team know where they're at. Over the course of the day, if something changes, they update their their face on the moodometer as they're passing their colleagues or going down the hall, types of things like that. It's a way that, yeah, there's a way that they kind of buy into it and support the normalization and the acceptance of having these conversations of how emotions are helping us and derailing us.
I like that. um, emotion. What is it?
Oh, it's a
Socratic moment?
response, right? Yeah, I know, right? Well, where do you want to go with this, right? So the writings on emotions has evolved so much in recent years. Um, I remember many years ago starting a workshop with a group of executives from the mining industry, and I used the word emotion, and all of a sudden, arms crossed, sat back in the chair, and one of them spoke up and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! We don't talk about emotions here, all right? Emotions I think, our signals, our indicators. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Sometimes they mislead us in what we're truly feeling or experiencing." And so sometimes they get the best of us. And I think it's important to have a good handle of the emotion vocabulary. Brene Brown did it great with Atlas of the Heart. And I'd recommend that for everyone who's trying to learn about emotion language, the language of emotions, so that they can improve that. We've shared that with our kids so that they have a better vocabulary as it relates to that as they grow up, because it's an important part of it's a variable that influences our behavior. We wrote a paper several years ago now, and the relationship between emotions and motivation, and it's a thing. It's evident. Your emotions have direct bearing over your motivation, and so does your mindset. And it's an interesting phenomenon. So when we think about it, so this is important. Why would we stop talking about emotions? Because it doesn't make us comfortable when it has such a strong influence over outcomes, right? When we experience happiness and joy and love or greater satisfaction, we're more likely to, as you mentioned, give forward, give to others. When we're experiencing pain, anger, things like that, it's kind of shifting our focus. And so it's an important part of who we are. So let's not deny it. Let's not dwell on it too much, right? Like, so think about with kids, if you had kids and you're like, oh, don't give them too much attention when he's throwing a temper tantrum, right? We don't want to give too much attention in the organization also. I think that's one of the slippery slopes of culture work is that sometimes people can't manage both performance and culture simultaneously. And so they get so engrossed with the culture stuff that they overly respond to emotion and taking care of the team. And now they're falling behind on their performance side. So emotions are an integral part of who we are as people.
I had a philosophical experience around emotion, and this is from Robert Solomon. I believe he was an inspirational figure to Peter Salovey, who was one of the founders of the social emotional learning movement.
Yeah.
And Dr. Solomon's thought about emotion is that the essence of an emotion is that it's an evaluative judgment. And so we have explicitly held values and implicitly held values, and that basically emotions are when we compare what has happened, what is happening, or what we think will happen to our values. Um, that the emotion is the thing that ensues, and that it's combined with a propensity to start planning a response to whatever it is, whether it's whatever happening is good, like how can we capitalize on that, or if it's bad, like how do we get by or deal with it, or fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
But yeah, that it sort of has always captivated me as to what an emotion is. And then I think in the contemporary debates on the research side, on one side, I think you've got Lisa Feldman Barrett saying that emotions are totally a human construct and an effect of nurture, and that it feels like they're innate natural things that are embedded within us. But I believe her idea is that it's a slow act that develops over time. Kind of interesting. And then on the other
Mhm.
hand, I think you could say we have someone like Yak Pangsep who has um, belief that we have some innate wiring within us around, he calls it primal emotions: seeking, lust, care, play, rage, fear, and panic slash grief. For his play dynamic, he removed the neocortex from mice and found that they still played. So he saw that like as evidence of play being like innately wired, because you don't have the neocortex engaging in thought about what's happening or what have you. Um, so I kind of find each of those to be have certain appealing aspects to it, but then also to step back and, in that philosophical moment, to think of Robert Solomon's idea that the essence of an emotion is that it is an evaluative judgment. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, that seems true too.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah.
Anyways, but it's like, that may be like a little too, oh, did I pass my 20 seconds?
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, here he goes on the theory again. Yeah, it's, and that's why we bring these all together because they're different schools of thoughts, different perspectives, and they all have their own truths and they all have their own limitations. And so what are we going to do with this now, right? Like it's hard for us to evaluate if other beings or other creatures have emotions to that first person's point, right? But just because you have emotions and they're related to your values doesn't mean you know how to live according to your values. That's one of the things I wrote about not too long ago is we did this values activity in a workshop once, and all these people were saying they value personal accountability. Well, I did my homework with the CEO before we started the workshop. I said, "What's your biggest problem right now?" They're like, "Holding people accountable." I'm like, "Isn't that funny, right? Like that they all value accountability, but they're not capable. They don't possess the skill set to do that." So, just as much as a lot of other things, these are guideposts for us to work through these challenges.
And do you have a um like a attraction towards that, like emotions are constructed or emotions are innate? Do you enter the fray there, or is it?
Uh, my wife spends way more time in that space than I do. Yeah, they are what I have to deal with and I have to work with, and I know how they grab people. So I'm not as at the end of the day. So this is what I was telling someone earlier. At the end of the day, what I'm concerned about is how can I help systems and people flourish, right? Based on the information and the science, because I have the ability to read it and integrate it into my strategies. And where actually my special talent is the execution of these things. Is actually I could take a book, I could take a model from anyone, or I could use my own stuff, of course. And if people are like, "Hey, I want to run with this. I want to build this whole system around, let's say, strength, something that I actually don't use often because we're focusing on other things mainly." And they say, "We want to build a whole system around strengths." That's not a problem. That's what I can do. Like it's we build things to address the stuff that needs to be addressed. What is the quality of the input you're giving me? And what's the timeline? What's the budget? All these things, right?
I like it. I would guess that on the in the Gallup Strengths Finder, you might have achiever in there.
Yeah, I think so too. Like I said, I can't remember the strategic. Yeah, you mentioned one of yours that earlier that I'm like, yep, that would have been in mine too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and we recognize them, and we work with, we recognize that with our teams, but we also recognize that there's a lot of growth and benefit working outside of our strengths also that actually opens up new aspects to our life and new experiences. And so if I think about it, we go back to my VIA, a lot of that stuff in there wouldn't be there if it wasn't for me moving outside of my strengths, right? Gratitude, appreciation of beauty. Who the heck had time when I was 25 to slow down and appreciate beauty and be grateful for anything, right? Like, so, and it wasn't until I tried some hard stuff, figured some things out, lost some things that I grew into these things. So, as much as strengths are our friend and our benefit, we also have to, I think at least, one of our strengths is that we're adaptable and resilient as humans, and we can grow into these. Just to your point earlier, that if I wanted to move bravery up, I could move bravery up on my list by spending more time focusing on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for entertaining my fascination with emotion. Uh, Now for motivation. The
Yeah.
one I'm not as familiar with motivation theory. The one that I have heard of is self-determination theory, and I think that is proposes that we have certain psychological needs, such as the need for relatedness, autonomy, and competence, and that we will experience some kind of psychological distress if we don't realize those things. And the thing that feels kind of unique in those needs compared to, say, like hunger or um, like tiredness is that when we satisfy them, they don't end in that we can continue in our quest for relatedness to the point of friendship, or in our need for autonomy to the point of like living an authentic life, or with the uh you know pursuit of competence leading to like mastery. And it's like there's this upside that doesn't have an end to it, versus like hunger. Like I can only eat so much food. I mean,
Right.
maybe if I trained to be a competitive eater, I could have more, but I'm
Yeah.
guessing that there's a
Right, right.
certain point where, uh, yeah. So it like, and there may be other theories of motivation that are more up to date. But that one in particular sort of has me fascinated.
Yeah, and
What is it like?
that's what I focus a lot on. Like if you get into our models page, you'll see there's two different versions of this in terms of a model that we use with our clients. When I talk about it, when I introduce it, um, it's and I'll bring in Maslow's hierarchy and and demonstrate where I think Maslow missed a few pieces, that actually these three basic psychological needs are foundational elements to the hierarchy. So without them, you wouldn't be able to source food. You wouldn't be able to source shelter, right? So if you didn't have competence, you couldn't actually kill your food or grab your food. Um, and so it's directly tied to, in my opinion, a foundational element of human flourishing in the workplace. And if you go onto our website, just blackriverpm.com/models, you'll find that and the other ones there. Um, and so from there, what we know is that fuels discretion and high quality intrinsic motivation, right? And so when you're dipping in that area of competence or autonomy, you know that your motivation's eroding. And we actually use it. If you go all the way to the bottom of our models page, there's a dashboard that we use it to really express how motivation, how to understand motivation. We call it the CAR model, and how to use that without having to know the theory and the background of what motivation science is about this. We use this with clients. So how do I diagnose what my client's experiencing right now? And if we have time for it, I'll give you a great little example of how we've done this in the past.
Yes, please.
So I had a CEO reach out to me. We were One of the arrangements we had was called the bat phone. They text me and they're whenever they want, and we kind of quickly coordinate the appointment to deal with what they're working through. Right? It's kind of like a 15-minute crash course MBA on difficult conversations or whatever, terminating someone. Um, and so she reaches out to me and she said, I need to talk. I have a meeting with Gloria coming up and I need to talk about what to do with her. She has not been hitting her mark for several weeks now. It's actually getting old. It's the work's falling on other employees. We're losing our momentum, things like that. I said, well, did you check her car? And this is the language we use with our clients. And she said, yeah, I checked her car. I said, well, let's check her car again. Let's just do this together. So let's talk about competency. C is for competency. Competency is the ability to do the job correctly, consistently, right? So is Gloria competent? And she said, no, she's not. I said, okay, tell me more. How long has Gloria worked here? 2 years. So she's worked here for 2 years and she's not competent in her role yet. She said, no, 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 no. She was competent. 6 months in, she was teaching and training everyone. She had full control over the system, but she's not anymore. I said, well, let's just keep this definition really strict. For all intents and purposes, at work, she's competent. It's like riding a bike. You kind of don't forget. You might be rusty, but you don't forget. Unless she experienced a traumatic head injury or you change something in the work environment, right? We've all been there. We're going to a new software system or we're going to a new accounting system. And it's like, well, everyone's incompetent now because we don't know how to use this. So the CEO is like, nope, none of that stuff's happened. I said, okay, for argument's sake, she's competent at work in her job. How about autonomy? What's going on as it relates to autonomy? We know that micromanagement is a problem because when someone has high competence, they deserve high autonomy. But what happens with micromanagement is high people with high competence, their autonomy is diminished for whatever that reason is. We're not going to get into that now. But so maybe does Gloria have a new supervisor that's overbearing, meddling, whatever? And she's like, nope, that hasn't changed at all. I said, okay. So let's talk about relatedness. Let's talk about team dynamics and relationships. Any new team members, right? Because sometimes, like I said before, we're might be one hire away from a bad system, a problem. And she said, nope, nothing's changed in terms of the team dynamics. I said, okay. So she's obviously not successful. You've been having these conversations. She can't give you any answers. And we're at this point now where we're trying to figure out, are we going to keep her? How do we augment the workforce if we have to? Things like that. I said, did you check her car at home? And she goes, whoa, Rob, I don't talk about home life. And you just think about this, Nick, you and me, right? With this well-being lens in the back of our mind going, oh boy, right? Like, yeah, I said you need to visit with her on if there's anything going on out of work. She's like, I don't do happy hours. I don't do, I don't meet with staff socially, any of that stuff. I said, okay, well, we can talk about that later, but I need you to check in with her and check her car. She's like, I don't know. That doesn't make me very comfortable. I said, all you need to do is just acknowledge where you've come, that we've been having these conversations about your performance. It's not improving. I'm finding myself in the situation where we're starting to look at alternative solutions for you if you can't help us, mitigate these problems. How can we work through this? Because the team can't keep being behind, right? So is there anything else you'd like to share with me? She's like, I don't know, Rob. I said, please just kind of bridge it that way. Just approach it. So she asks, and so basically what I say is, go ahead, have your conversation, call me later on tonight, let me know how it goes. She calls me later and she's like, Robbie, I'd never believe it. I was like, okay, what? She's like, I checked her car at home. And that's the language we use, right? It's such an easy concept. I checked her car at home, and this is what I found out. First, her live at home high school daughter is pregnant. So arguably, maybe it could have some effect on her view of her competence as a mother. Number two, her husband and her are at odds, and it's becoming more and more intense fighting. So right there, very clear relatedness, right? Just because you're married doesn't mean you're not lonely, right? Like, and I hate saying that, but there's a lot of truth to that, that I have to get my cup filled by a variety of sources, like my guys when we go fish, my wife when we go on vacation. You know what I mean? Like, so, and so most of us have to acknowledge that one person can't fulfill everything. So her relatedness was eroded with her husband. And then the third thing we found out is her mother-in-law's moving in. So what do you think that does for her autonomy factor, her agency, her independence, right? And so these are dotted lines to each of the car items. They're not hard and fast, but when you start to use this framework to start thinking about things like this, you start to get deep fast. And we see motivation thrown around a lot. Flourishing's not thrown around as much, but we see motivation thrown around a lot. And the strengths play into this too. Like, well, maybe I should be focusing on my strengths to be more motivated. Well, you're starting too high up the pyramid, Maslow's pyramid, to have that conversation if people are food insecure, housing insecure, not safe, things like that. So, anyways, and what we find with a lot of people, it could be a car at home, it could be a car at work. Like it's fluid and it's dynamic, and sometimes people might not need any relationship and relatedness at work because they're fulfilled at home. But who knows what happens in that relationship, and then they need it one day at work, right? So it's a juggling act here, but it's something that we've found to be a very powerful tool as a part of our motivation language with our partners and our clients, getting away from strength. Like that's for later on down the road. Like I said, getting into that purpose realm, that's for later on down the road. This is what we see too often. People start at that strengths or purpose level of Maslow, and unfortunately, not everyone can be there in terms of where their mindset is. And so this is what I think is super important as we talk about flourishing, is understanding what those core fundamental or basic psychological needs are of people, and then starting there and moving forward.
Thank you. Um, I find that awesome that the one motivation model that I have
You picked.
explored happens to be the one that seems to be being useful in your work. So,
Right, right. I'm glad you picked that one.
awesome. Well, now, so when you look forward, um,
Mhm.
it- what do you want to be doing in the future?
Gosh, my answer when people ask me stuff about like retirement and future, and even right now, is if it's fun, I want to do it. When it stops being fun, that's when I'll move away and shift or pivot, right? I just I like what we're doing. I like what I'm doing with students and classes. I like what I'm doing with clients and industry. Part of part of the reason why the balance of the two is so important is because our program's 100% online, so anyone could take it anywhere, which is also a benefit for me. So I could travel and live anywhere, work anywhere, and teach and facilitate. But there's something magical, even with us, Nick, right now, just having these conversations. You're many miles away, but at least we could have a live conversation that we can't do necessarily on an asynchronous platform of a class. But that's also why I have a lot of students are they're encouraged to I'll coach them through classes. Every week we have check-ins on certain projects and certain classes so that we can go a little deeper and get beyond that kind of text transactional and video transactional experience. And so that's why I love going out and meeting with people and just got back from Alaska, worked with a couple groups up there, and it's a lot of fun. And then when you see the enthusiasm and the response and the light bulbs go on when they're talking about it, those are things I never see when I'm, at the online class, right? Because if it's not live streamed, it's not real time.
Yeah, there's something about being in the moment with others.
Yeah, yeah. And who knows what that's going to be in the future, right? I don't know if I have another day here in this world, so I'll make the most out of it while I'm here. And if something has to change, if I need to change careers or locations, I'll do it, make it work. Well, fun. I'm resourceful.
Well, this is fun, but I think there probably needs to be a point at which we conclude it.
Yeah,
Um, otherwise, we'll just keep going.
yeah, I know,
Uh,
right?
are there any parting words of wisdom or anything else we haven't talked about that you'd like to share?
No, this is important stuff, as you know, Nick, and I appreciate people kind of leaning into this content and understanding it because it brings a lot of purpose and value to life. And I like to think at least people that are strengths focused are of a mindset that they're more givers, if you take that as a concept, a giver towards others, towards community, towards coworkers. And that's what we need right now. We need community now more than ever, and we need a lot of support and love from people we work with as well as people in our social life.
Rob Leone, thank you so much for being a guest on the program.
Awesome. Thank you. I enjoyed it, Nick. Thank you very much.